Hi, everyone. Welcome to another amazing topic of conversation. Today, I'm really honored to have Deborah Stern, an amazing attorney, and we're talking about the domino effect on the disruption of the supply chain. Everybody has seen the pictures of the million containers stuck at sea. Prices are going up. There's a lot of things that have been totally disrupted with the supply chain. So basically, my guest today will give us a basic explanation on what's going on and how we can make it better or what's in it for us. So Deborah, thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me, Gladys. This is an area near and dear to my heart and my clients' hearts. I'm a customs and trade attorney, so I'm pretty much living and breathing these problems day in and day out.
So tell us a little bit about yourself before I shoot you with a million questions.
I have been a customs and trade attorney for about 20 years. I started my career at U.S. Customs and Border Protection at its headquarter office, handling trade policy, administrative rulings, and also I was a representative to the World Customs Organization's Harmonized System Committee, which is the international body that governs the global tariff system that most countries use to classify their goods, resolve disputes between where goods should be classified, which leads to what their duty rates are and the basic cost of importing. From there, I've spent the last 15 years in private practice at Sandler, Travis, and Rosenberg, which is a boutique customs and trade firm. All we deal with is the movement of goods across borders.
Okay, the best person to ask all my questions. So there's not only a disruption in the supply chain, but there's also a lot of logistical problems.
That's right. The supply chain delays, which lots of folks have heard about, there's not one root cause. Certainly, the pandemic has been a major part of the problem, but it's not the only cause. And in alluding to the title of the program, any one piece of the puzzle falls down and it affects everything ahead of it and even some of the things behind it. So when you have factories shut down because of the pandemic, you're going to have a shortage of actual inventory because goods aren't being made or they're not being made as quickly. But you also have a number of issues that have arisen post-factory, getting the goods to the ports, getting them on the ships, getting the ships to where they need to go. A great example of the delays that can have basically kind of a mushroom effect really is the Ever Given, the evergreen ship that was stuck in the Suez Canal last year. I think there was one estimate at the time that said it was costing the world, the global economy, $400 million an hour, because it's not just the goods on that ship that are delayed, but every other ship that was stuck in the canal with it can't get in or out. So all of those ships are delayed, but it's not just the ships. It's the cargo on the ships. It's the containers that are holding the cargo. All of those things get held up when one thing gets stuck in the chain. And all of the logistics routes, I mean, everybody had to reroute. You had, ships coming into port at different times than they were supposed to, and other ships that were on time coming from different places, right, already berthed at that port. So you had this incredibly massive trickle down effect that caused massive delays throughout the globe because of one ship that got stuck in one part of the world.
So now we've been hearing that there's a shortage of containers. So please explain what
Right.
what that's all about.
So part of it is everything in the supply chain disruption relates a lot to high demand and low supply. And with containers, it's no exception. There's a finite number of shipping containers in the world. And a lot of them actually are managed by a couple of very big carriers, which doesn't help. But from a very basic level, a container that's stuck on a ship waiting at the, outside the port of Long Beach for a berth, those containers can't get unladen and then refilled with new product, or can't get back to origin to get new product until they are able to berth and get unladen and then get repurposed, recycled back. And where you have, for example, LA is a great example because you have the LA Long Beach ports, they're like twin ports, where you've got 30, 40 container, ships just sitting in the water waiting for a berth space. You have a labor shortage that is unable to unladen those ships quickly enough to get those containers out and to get the goods onto their routes to get to their right. Yeah, right, exactly. They're missing, it's just like airplane, they're missing their connections. And so you have a huge portion of containers that are stuck on ships. All the ships are delayed, and it's not just the Port of Long Beach. You have different shortages in other places. But right now, it's kind of a perfect storm where you have some issues with controls at the top of the food chain and a lot of issues that the other delays in the supply chain are keeping those containers from getting unladen and back into the circulation. And so that's increasing the cost of a container.
So wait, not only there's the container because you have the shortage of labor to actually get it down from the ship. Mm-hmm. And the container is not yet emptied because it has to transport and deliver the goods.
Right.
And that's another issue because there's a shortage of truckers.
Right. There's a big shortage of truckers. We're in the US, I think, at capacity, and yet still a shortage. You don't have enough drivers, partly because of COVID, partly because it's an industry that's not able to attract as many new folks into the industry. You also have a number of issues that come to pass with when you talk about supply chain security. There are new protocols in place and have been for years now, and they're increasing, that everybody who's driving a truck will have to have a background check and have to go through a secure process to be part of this secure supply chain. In the US, we have something called CTPAT, or the Customs and Trade Partnership Against Terrorism, and it's our supply chain security protocol. Other countries have something called AEO, Authorized Economic Operator. It's a similar thing, and you have to have security throughout your supply chain, visibility throughout your supply chain, transparency throughout your supply chain. And so any portion of that supply chain is going to require a certain caliber of individuals that are staffing warehouses, driving trucks, et cetera, and that can cause a further shortage depending upon what's going on in the economy. And again, COVID had a big part to do with a lot of these shortages today.
I read today that Britain is actually giving visas for truck drivers to go to Great Britain and be a truck driver there. They're giving all the benefits possible.
It doesn't surprise me at all because in fact, there's a recent article, HSBC, the bank, did a study showing that in the UK in particular, through a confluence of Brexit, the pandemic, and an aging out population of truck drivers, their shortage has a lot to do with the fact that they have a lot of older drivers and they don't have younger ones to replace them. So I'm not surprised to hear that they're incentivizing in every means possible. Just like our healthcare industry is offering major bonuses, not just for nurses and doctors, but PCAs and other nursing aides and support staff, because it's very hard to hire right now in some of these industries because of the pandemic.
Wow. So, okay, with everything that you just explained, can't and I don't know how to say this exactly, but when they take the container out, it's automized. Can't there be like a plan B?
So,
implementation of the whole process while they get to the actual truck?
So in some parts of the world, there's a phenomenal amount of automation going on. For example, in Hong Kong, a ship will berth and get unladen in probably a third the time of a US ship. And some of that has to do with what is allowed within labor contracts. For example, in the US, there are some limitations on what automation can do replacing human jobs, because some of those jobs are simply reserved for humans. And where we have a shortage of human capital, then we're going to have delays that automation maybe could fix, but aren't allowed to fix,
Yes,
or
and
would
I'm
take too much
not
time.
trying to change because it's always better to have the person getting the job. But in this case, it's affecting everywhere. It's affecting
Right.
everyone. So prices have risen. Give me an example of how much was a container from Asia to the US before the pandemic and now.
So I think it was around 2019, might have been 2018, a 40-foot container, which is your standard container size, would run about $2,000 to go on an ocean carrier from China to the United States. And now that price is upwards of $7,000, $8,000, $9,000, even up to maybe even $25,000 for a premium paid for on-time delivery. On-time delivery is practically non-existent right now because of the delays that are going on with all of the carriers. I think I read something that only about 35% of containers right now are working on an on-time status.
But wait, how can you work on an on-time status if there's like 40 ships just waiting
You
to
can't.
be docked? And if there's someone buying something today and I say, okay, I'll charge you prime $25,000, the buyer agrees, they cannot get them because what? They're going to cut the line?
Right. So I
Right?
don't think that's really happening
That's
so
like the
much.
easy explanation of how I see it.
Right. No, it is. And honestly, I can't really explain how the premium paid gets you to the front of the line. But it has something to do with the routes that are taken, and probably a more expensive route to get from point A to point B faster, and not so much faster from, as the crow flies, but faster because of the delays in the other ports of entry. A ship may be docking at several different ports before it gets here. So it's kind of like, in some respects, it can be the equivalent of a direct
Right,
flight
right.
versus your layovers, right? But there are a number of other factors that go into that too. For example, being placed, the placement on the carrier can affect how quickly a container gets unladen, and that can be part of the premium paid, is the location on the container ship where your container is going to be. So there are a number of different factors that go into what those prices are. But there's also just an overall increase in prices due to competition in the marketplace, which some are alleging are unfair trade practices by the carriers. And that's something actually that is I know in the domestic industry is working on trying to get redressed through the US Congress. There's legislation on the Shipping Act reform. The Shipping Act has been around since 1800s. And there are measures in the Shipping Act that prevent unfair trade practices. For example, right now, some carriers are verticalizing the entire supply chain, buying up freight forwarders, buying up customs brokers, buying up other parts of the supply chain in order to verticalize, right, and make more efficient. But in doing so, they may also be able to offer benefits that the mom and pop freight forwarder and the mom and pop trucking company can't offer and can't compete with. Well, some of those, in theory, should fall under the protections of our Shipping Act. However, the Federal Maritime Commission, or FMC, which governs and carries out the act, doesn't have any enforcement authority. So right now, there's a measure that's been proposed in Congress and is getting some support. So we should see some movement on it soon, I hope. That is going to address some of those deficiencies in the current measures in the enforcement authority of the Federal Maritime Commission, to allow them greater authority to investigate and greater resources to investigate these allegations and redress them. Similarly, there are exorbitant demurrage fees, which relates to actually the rental of the container. The longer a container sits on a port, and can't be inspected and released, the more demurrage fees are passed on to the importer and ultimately end up somehow or another in the pocket of the, sorry, not in the pocket of the consumer, in the pocket of the carrier, but affect the consumer's cost of goods. And so some of these fees, again, have gotten so exorbitant that this is also part of the Shipping Reform Act that is being considered right now in the Congress.
But this is just here. Will it affect worldwide, or it won't make a difference?
It could, I should say, make some difference. Where you have carriers that this becomes somewhat of a question of the, how far does the long arm of U.S. law extend? If you have a foreign-owned carrier and a foreign-owned ship, how do you get those parties to cooperate under the U.S. law? Right. But when they present themselves at a U.S. court, they do put themselves under some modicum of jurisdiction. So those are some of the challenging mechanics that have to be worked out. Will legislation in the U.S. be enough? We don't know.
How do we unclog this? Where do we start?
I don't think that there's a linear path, because right now, as I mentioned before, it's kind of a perfect storm of so many challenges between labor, the container shortages, the carrier costs, and you have to work on each of them. In some respects, it's kind of like addressing climate change. We can't all go to solar power if we live in a part of the country where solar power isn't very effective because you don't get enough sun during the day, or you can't use wind energy in a place where you don't have enough wind, but maybe you can use wave energy. So what I think part of it is you have to regionalize some of the solutions, and the US can't be the only one making solutions. Other areas of the world have their own problems. As you mentioned, the UK is incentivizing, right, for new truckers. You have to work on all of these things at once. For example, here in Miami, there's an issue where some of the delays are being caused because one of our 2 container freight stations, which performs inspections, closed down. And so everything had to shift to one. Well, in theory, it might not have been a big problem, because all of the customs officers that are performing the inspections responsible for them would move over to the other facility.
Okay.
But the reality was also that the facility still has to have the capacity to handle the cargo, to handle the containers. They have to be open for longer hours. The warehouses that then hold the goods while waiting to be inspected have to open for longer hours. This is something actually that the local Florida Customs Brokers and Freight Forwarders Association, which we work closely with, had recently sat down, conducted a roundtable to try to help resolve some of those issues, because everybody that was part of that supply chain had to be in the discussion. It had to be U.S. Customs, it had to be the container freight station, the warehouses, the truckers. Everybody had to come together, and each had their own grievances. So it's a work in progress.
So basically, it's like, what comes first, the chicken or the egg?
Exactly. There is no one solution, just as there is no one cause of the problem.
Do you see, for example, that there will be more rotation of inventory made in the country and not depending so much of the imports?
That's an interesting question. I think that our economy is so reliant on foreign imports for so many things that just aren't made and done here, that it's going to take a long time for that kind of inventory circulation to really resolve, or relieve some of the pressures. I think, in the short term, it's just going to be a really tough Christmas, because the things that need to get here by now to be ready to be put on the shelves for Christmas can't get here now. And we can't supplement or replace those with domestically made goods, or goods that maybe can be trucked in from Canada or Mexico, if there are things that just aren't made in these 3 countries.
Correct, because there's also, again, the trucking shortage.
Right. You have so many issues, not to mention some of the other issues on the border, which we won't get into.
And the
Um,
labor issue.
mhm. The labor issues are, again, also a longer term problem because we have very strong labor unions with very strict positions on what they're willing to give into for their labor workforce. And you have also trying to attract talent to US factories. No matter how much any administration incentivizes companies in the United States to make more and build more and do more, you have to be able to fill those positions with qualified individuals. Those individuals need training. Those individuals may need technical degrees. They may need more than that. So again, it's still a chicken and egg. Just because we can give money to a factory to expand its capacity doesn't necessarily mean it can turn over double the capacity in a year, because it has to invest in expanding those resources, which again includes some human capital issues.
I have to do a shout out to She Truck organization. And there's a woman that is actually promoting women to get into truck driving. And the organization is called She Truck.
I love it. I love it.
And she's promoting education, telling them where are the stops, how to help each other in each of the 50 states, and promoting them because now there is a very good pay.
There is, and we
So,
were talking the other day within the Florida Customs Brokers and Freight Forwarders Association about the challenges that the freight forwarders and the truckers are having in hiring. And we got into the discussion both here and elsewhere about not just She Truck, but reminds me of people are calling this period of time the She Session, because as a result of the pandemic, more women had to leave the workforce than men, and trying to get them back into the workforce, but in a way that allows them to still manage some of the challenges that we're all facing, right? In schooling and working from home. I myself am still working from home and have 2 school-age children. It is not easy. There are not enough hours in the day.
no, I get it. But it's also an opportunity for women, for example, that they don't have any kids, or they have someone that can take care of the kids and they can be away from home for a certain period of time because the pay is really good.
No, absolutely. And I think the more that associations like She Truck get out into the public and partner with the right resources to match people looking for work with people who have work and who can train. In fact, again, I keep mentioning FCBF just because I know they're also have a new trade academy, and they're coordinating with a lot of the colleges and, again, doing a similar kind of outreach. And I think it might be a great connection to put them together with She Truck. I think that would be phenomenal.
Totally, because that's what creating opportunities for a lot of people. And I know that women now, after the pandemic, they're not going to go back to what they had
Right,
because they can't.
right. No, it's
So
true.
it's like, okay, you want me, these are my conditions, this is what I will go. And companies are in a position of literally bending and saying, okay, we'll have you, whatever you want.
I know it's really amazing to see in the different industries, who's going back to a 9 to 5
Not a
workspace,
lot of
and most
people.
aren't. Yeah, no, a lot aren't. And there is a lot of value in having FaceTime, and thankfully Zoom and all of the other video conferencing platforms have allowed us to have some of that FaceTime. It's not the same as being able to walk next door to the person that sits next to you and ask them a question. But it certainly helps. I actually have a lot more FaceTime with my clients now, because everybody's, oh, we'll get on Zoom. All right, we'll turn on the camera. And it does make a difference to have that personal time. but to have the flexibility. I mean, one of the reasons that I've stayed in private practice as long as I did, I never thought that I would stay in private practice this long. Billable hours are not fun, but I have flexibility here. And that's hugely important, particularly at, when you have children, when you have, and even parents. I'm the sandwich generation right now with two parents who are both in difficult situations and small children that I'm helping everyone. And to be able to know where the resources are, identify what the problems are, and then know where the resources are to help try to solve them, whether it's personal or whether it's on an industry-wide basis, is so important. And that's why platforms like this, Gladys, I'm so thankful for the opportunity to come and talk on your platform, because we have so much to get out there in the community and get people talking.
No, it's like basic understanding what is happening, because a lot of people are saying, wait, everything is from China and China is controlling the prices, and that's actually not true. So that was one of the reasons that I wanted to talk to you, so that we can explain in black and white and in simple terms how all this became a domino effect.
Right now, it started becoming such a bigger issue because of the pandemic. But no, this one's not entirely on China.
This one's on a global scale.
Absolutely.
Deborah, thank you so much. We're out of time. I really appreciate this. And everyone, please stay tuned for the next one. And above all, stay safe. Have a great week.